So, what's brilliant about London? Its transport system. What's a nightmare about London? Also, its transport system. You could actually look forward to it, or you could be in absolute dread of it if you don't know how to navigate it. So, which one is it going to be? Hi guys, I must confess I was quite overwhelmed with the transport system in the UK because it can get a little complicated. I mean, in India, most of the times you just take a train or a bus or a cab. But here there are so many options, so many different lines, it's natural that you're going to get confused. To be honest, I think I've landed up on the wrong train a couple of times, but now with experience, I've finally got the hang of it and I think I'm quite comfortable on the trains right now and quite good at it. So a couple of days ago, I asked for suggestions on Instagram and on YouTube on what the next video should be, and one of you suggested this and I was like, oh my god, yes! The transport system in the UK is so complicated, it absolutely deserves its own video. So in today's video, we're talking about UK's transport system, the train and tube system, buses, transport outside London, travel hacks to travel for cheaper in the UK, transport apps you must absolutely have, and how to travel to and from the airport. I'm Ashika, and with that, let's dive in. So depending on where you want to go, how much you want to spend, and how much time you have in your hands, there's a bunch of options in terms of transport, both public and private in the UK, and you can pick whichever you want. So there's the train, there's the tube, the bus, the tram, the ferry, cabs, bikes, the Emirates cable car, helicopter, not kidding, and horse-drawn carriages, again, not kidding. Now, like you can imagine, some of these are a little more touristy than others, so don't expect to roll into your office every day in a horse-drawn carriage. That might be a little too much, or even the helicopter for that matter, but they do exist. But the honest truth is that most people, when they commute within the UK, they either take the bus, the train, the tube, cabs, they bike it, or they walk, or if you have a tram wherever you live, then trams. If you plan on traveling in London, there are a couple of terms you should familiarize yourself with. The first one is TfL, or Transport for London. The second one is the GWR, which is the Great Western Railway, and as you can imagine, it's not really limited to London, it's the Western Railway. The next thing you need to know is that London is divided into zones, with Zone 1 being the closest or the nearest to central London, and Zone 9 being further away. So it's divided between Zone 1 and Zone 9. Now, the reason why you need to know about zones is because which zone you're coming from honestly will determine how much you pay as your ticket price. So obviously, the further away you stay from Zone 1 or the further away you're traveling between zones, the more expensive your tickets will get. This is the tube map, and like you can see, there are zones. There are also lines. There are multiple lines, and this is just London because the tube goes only to London. There's a red line, blue line, yellow line, yada yada. Now, I wouldn't worry too much about the lines. What I first suggest is you figure out where you're going from and where you need to go, and then you can figure out where on the map it falls, whether it's in the north, south, east, west, whatever. The line will come naturally. Or the simpler way to do it is, and the way I do it is, you just look at Google Maps or one of the other apps I'll talk about really quickly, and then you don't really have to worry about too much about what these lines are, because the apps will really tell you where you need to go from which platform, all of those details. Now, another really important thing is when you're traveling. So when you travel honestly determines how much you're going to pay as your ticket fare, because there are peak times and non-peak times. Peak hours are basically from 6:30 to 9:30 in the morning and from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the evening on Monday to Friday. Now, you really need to remember this because I will bring this up a bunch of times going ahead in the video, and you will also need to remember this on a daily basis when you're booking your tickets to try and see if you can reduce your prices anyway. One of the most popular ways of traveling within London is obviously the tube, like you might have heard of it, or it's also called the Underground at times, and it's really great because it honestly connects almost all of London to each other. Now, something else you need to know is that at the tube stations, you have to pay via a ticket at the ticket barriers. There are ticket barriers at the entry and exit of every station, and these ticket barriers accept card, they accept contactless payments, and they accept travel cards, Oyster cards, all of that. But the point is they don't accept cash. So you can't go and try and give cash to a ticket barrier, it won't accept it. So if you don't have a card on you, and if you don't have contactless or anything like that, you will have to buy a ticket or a day pass or whatever it is at the entrance of the station and use it at the ticket barriers. For areas that aren't covered by the tube, you've got the Overground Rail. There's also something called the Docklands Light Railway, a unique driverless railway line which also connects with the tube at various junctions. The areas that are not covered by the underground or the overground are covered by the rail services. Now, just like with the tube, the rail system also has the same process. They have ticket barriers, so you need tickets to go in, or you need to have a card that accepts tap and pay or contactless payment. Now, on your ticket, if you buy a physical ticket, it will be mentioned till where that ticket is valid. Now, assume I wanted to go from Maidenhead to Paddington because I live in Maidenhead. I'm going to use that as an example. And if I decide not to use my card or contactless and I decide to buy a ticket, I will buy one ticket from Maidenhead to Paddington and another ticket back from Paddington back to Maidenhead. The ticket will have it written, whether it's from Maidenhead to Paddington or vice versa, whatever it is. So when I enter the station at Maidenhead, I need to pop this little ticket into the slot, into the ticket barrier. It's going to swallow it up and it's going to scan it and it's going to pop it back out, and I need to keep this ticket with me. Hop on the train. Now, when I get off at Paddington, I need to then present this same ticket at the ticket barrier at the Paddington station, or I can't leave the station. So I need to pop it again into the ticket barrier. This time it's going to swallow the ticket and not give it back to me because the journey ends at Paddington, right? For that one specific ticket. To go back from Paddington to Maidenhead, you need to reserve or preserve the other ticket that you have because you'll have to repeat the process all over again to go back. Always remember, you need your ticket to enter and to exit from the train station, so don't toss it away after you've hopped onto that first train. If I'm using my card instead, it's a lot simpler. So I tap once at the Maidenhead station, then I get off at Paddington. At Paddington, at the ticket barrier again, I tap again, and now the system knows how much to calculate because it knows where I have tapped in and tapped out. And at the end of the day, not immediately after this journey, at the end of the day, it will then calculate how much I spent on the train or the rail system, and then a final amount will be deducted because after I get off at Paddington, I may go on the tube somewhere else. So the amount isn't honestly instantly debited, it's debited towards the end of the day. Something you should remember is that you can buy tube tickets at any rail stations and not just at tube stations. So keep that in mind. Now, when I want to go from Maidenhead to Paddington, I have multiple options. I can either take the Elizabeth line or I can take the GWR. I can't take a tube because, like I said, the tube is only valid within London and Maidenhead is outside London, so there's no tube over here. So I have to pick between one of these options. Now, I've already told you what the GWR is. Let me explain what the Elizabeth line is. It's basically a rail line that stretches more than 100 kilometers from Reading and Heathrow in the west, through central tunnels across Shenfield and Abbeywood in the east. Now, earlier, if I wanted to go from Reading or Maidenhead to Bond Street, which is in London, I would have had to take a GWR from either Reading or Maidenhead because there's no tube either at Maidenhead or at Reading because it's outside London. And I would have to take this train all the way till Paddington. At Paddington, I would have to get off, get out of the station, go downstairs to the tube station, get onto the tube, which then goes to Bond Street, and then I would be on my way. And this entire process of switching trains and stations would take anywhere between 3 minutes to 10 minutes, depending on how crowded the station is. Now, with the Elizabeth line, I can hop on either at Reading or at Maidenhead and go all the way to Bond Street from this same line. That's brilliant because I don't have to go through the hassle of changing trains now. Now, it's obviously slower because there are a lot of stops on the way, but it's definitely worth not having to go through all of the crowds and running up with all of your bags. Now, depending on where you want to go and how fast you want to go, there are multiple trains. Now, assume I want to go from Paddington back to Maidenhead in the evening after a long day of work. Well, there are multiple options. There's the Elizabeth line at 5:20, which isn't ideal because it stops at multiple stops and it takes 41 minutes. Then there's also a GWR train which stops at Maidenhead on the way to Reading at 5:56, but again multiple stops, so it takes 34 minutes. But there's also a faster train to Maidenhead, which is an express train, so slightly more expensive, but a lot faster because it takes only 22 minutes. So honestly, you have multiple options, and like you saw, apart from these 3 trains, there were also a lot of other trains. So plan ahead of your journey and you'll honestly see a lot of options, and with experience you'll know which routes are more crowded than others, because sometimes you easily get space on the train, sometimes you'll find it more difficult during extreme peak hours, so plan your journey ahead. Now there's also the buses in London, the iconic red buses, but something you should keep in mind, which we learned the hard way again, is that the buses don't accept cash. and every single adult needs to tap with their card or their either their debit, credit card, whatever, or their Oyster cards, which I'll come to in a bit. But the point is, you need to have an individual card. So if you're traveling in a bunch, well, maybe a pair or a bunch of people, one person can't pay for multiple people. You need to have individual cards. Again, the bus is definitely more inexpensive compared to the train, but it takes a little longer. So most people honestly do prefer the tube or the train rather than taking the bus. But considering all the strikes going on with the rail system right now, it might be a good option for you to know where your bus stop is, what the timings are, and how much it costs you. If you aren't really sure about the timings, the really good thing about the bus stops over here is that each of the bus stops has a little printed timetable of when the bus comes in the exact time, and the buses here are usually bang on time. So you can just refer to the timetable at the bus stop if you want to know what time the bus is coming. Now, for a minute, let's talk about transport outside London, because transport outside London isn't as robust as transport within London. For instance, Maidenhead didn't have the Elizabeth line until a few months ago, and now finally Reading and Maidenhead have it, which is absolutely great. The bus, on the other hand, of course, there are plenty of buses, but what I've normally seen is the buses usually do a repeat of the route every 1 hour. So if you've missed the bus, or if the bus doesn't suit your timings, you're honestly in a bit of a fix, because there is no other bus covering it. So you're going to have to wait for quite a bit. So you either plan your entire schedule according to the bus schedule, which is not really the way to do it, or you look for alternates. Like in our case, the bus stop is about 7 to 10 minutes away from our house, but we can't take the bus to school because the timings don't really match in our case. Either we get to school extremely early, like 20-30 minutes ahead of the school opening, or we get there too late, so it doesn't work out. So keep that in mind. Depending on where you live, if it's an extremely remote place, there may not even be buses coming close by. So if you are looking to find a house, always remember to check where the closest bus stop is, where the closest train station is, so that you don't end up being stranded, because we have holidayed in some places in the UK which are completely secluded and there's nothing close by. So make sure that doesn't happen to you. Now, as with all big places, of course, there are cabs also if you want to take a cab. The most prominent players, I would say, over here are Uber and Bolt. But apart from that, you also have local taxis or local cabs. So a lot of times when you get out of the station, you'll see a bunch of cabs parked over there. And in our case, the cabs are affiliated to the borough, so they have RBWM printed on all of their cabs. So we know they're not Ubers or Olas, and not Ola, sorry, I'm so used to India. They're not Ubers or Bolts, but they're actually city taxis. And that actually brings up a really interesting point. In India, for instance, and I don't know about other places, but I can tell you about India. In India, the cabs usually have some form of branding or the other on the cab, so you know it's a cab. But in the UK, the cabs often have no branding, so you don't know whether it's somebody's private car or it's a cab, which is why it's really important that if you're hopping into someone's car, please read the car number on your app before randomly jumping in, because there's no signage whatsoever most of the time, so you can make a mistake. Now, the tricky thing with cabs is that cab prices can fluctuate quite a bit. Now, on an average, if I had to take a cab from my house to the school, it's about 1.2 miles, and that would cost me about like $8 or $9. But there are times I have had to pay $30 just to go 1.2 miles, simply because it was a really cold day and there were absolutely no cabs available anywhere on that day, and so Uber decided to jack up the prices. So if you do plan on traveling really often by cab, keep that in mind. The prices can go up crazily, and sometimes there can be no cabs available. Now, another really common way to get around either London or some other major parts of the UK is also by bike. And the good thing about London is you can very easily hire these bikes. It can either be a regular cycle or it can be an electric bike, and you can hire them for about £1.65 for 30 minutes. And Santander has sponsored a lot of these bikes. You also see sometimes Barclays, some other bank. But it's a really, really good option. It's a really great way to see London, to get around London, no pollution, and very cost effective if you ask me. Now, one thing you should bear in mind is that people in the UK love to walk. They love to walk inside London, they love to walk outside London, they love to walk everywhere. Well, because A, they're smarter, B, they care about the environment, C, well, it's a beautiful walk, and D, they know what's good for their health, which we obviously don't. But anyway, a good option is to consider walking wherever you need to go. It's a very common sight here for you to see parents walking their children to school, people walking to the station to catch a train to go to work, people walking to the high street to buy groceries. They'll go along with their little bags. So very, very common to walk. If you can walk, I would highly suggest you do that. It's great for you. The air is absolutely brilliant. You won't regret it. That's quite a bit, wasn't it? But we're not even nearly done. We're next going to talk about travel hacks in the UK and how you can travel in the UK for cheaper. But if you feel this video has helped you till now, or even after you watch the entire video and you feel it's helped you, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and write down in the comments section below how you plan on traveling in the UK, or if you feel I've missed anything, let me know in the comments section below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. So if you don't plan on walking in the UK, it's going to cost you quite a bit. So it's really important for you to know how you can save money, because a lot of these expenses will be expenses you're incurring on a daily basis and they add up to quite a bit at the end of it. So let's break down how you can save money. Now, one way of doing this is by buying a travel card. A travel card in the zones it's valid for gives you unlimited travel at any time on the bus, tube, tram, DLR, London Overground, the Elizabeth Line, the National Rail Services in London. You can use it on all buses and, if valid, in zones 3, 4, 5 or 6 on all trams. You can use your travel card to get 1/3 off on riverboat fares on some services. Travel cards can start on any day. Now, you have the option of buying a 7-day travel card, which gives you 7 days of travel for the price of 5 days. There's also monthly travel cards, which are generally cheaper than buying 4 consecutive 7-day travel cards. They give you a saving of 11% compared with the continuing using of 7-day travel cards. There's also annual travel cards, which give you a saving of 13% compared to monthly travel cards. So you get 12 months travel for the price of 10.5. Another option is the day travel card. You can get unlimited travel in 1 day with a day travel card, which is a paper ticket. There's the option of anytime day travel cards, which can be used for the date on the ticket and for journeys starting before 4:30 the next day. There's also off-peak day travel cards, which are used from 9:30 from Monday to Friday, anytime on weekends or bank holidays for the date on the ticket and for journeys starting before 4:30 the next day. There's also a group day travel card if you are traveling in a group of 10 or more together. Another way of traveling for cheap is by using the Oyster card. It's basically a plastic smart card that you can add money to, like a prepaid balance, and you can do this at any tube station or shops where you see Oyster signage. You can pay as you go to travel on the bus, tube, tram, DLR, London Overground, most Elizabeth lines, the IFS Cloud Cable, the Thames Clipper River bus services. You can also travel on most national rail services in London and some outside London. The best part is you can add your travel card, bus, tram pass and your discounts to your Oyster card. Now, Oyster fares are substantially cheaper than buying paper tickets for single journeys. You can buy an Oyster card from any tube, London Overground and TfL station, as well as some DLR and national rail stations, and the card itself is free. But you would need to pay a £5 deposit when you get the first one. If you decide you no longer need your Oyster card, you can send it back and the TfL or the Transport for London will give you your deposit back. If you're 18 or over, a student and living in a London borough, you can get discounted travel with an Oyster photo card. Your 18+ student Oyster photo card expires when your course ends. With an 18+, you can save 30% on adult rate travel cards and bus and tram pass season tickets. Bear in mind there are some routes that don't accept Oyster, so make sure you check. For instance, you can't use an Oyster card between Paddington and Maidenhead because Oyster cards are not accepted at Elizabeth Line stations between Iver and Reading. And to get from Paddington to Maidenhead, you have to cross Iver, so Oyster is not valid there. There's another option called the Rail card. Your National Rail card gives you discount on the Tube, DLR, London Overground, Elizabeth Line and National Rail services. There's a 16 to 25 rail card which gives you 1/3 discount on off-peak pay as you go travel. You can add your discount to an Oyster card or an 18+ student Oyster photo card. There's also a 26 to 30 rail card which gives you 1/3 discount on off-peak pay as you go travel. Next, there's a senior rail card where if you're over 60, you can get 1/3 off on off-peak pay as you go travel, and you can add your discount to an Oyster card. There's also a network rail card where you get 1/3 discount on off-peak rail travel in London and the South East for either up to 3 adults aged 16 or over, or for up to 4 children aged between 5 and 15 that are traveling with you. There's also the Family and Friends rail card and a 2 Together rail card. Now I'll leave these details here so you can take a screenshot or make a note of it. And of course, you'll find a lot more details on the TfL website, which I will link in the description. When it comes to children under 5 can travel free at any time on all public transport without a ticket as long as they are accompanied by an adult with a valid ticket. Under 11s can travel free at any time on London's buses and trams without a ticket. They can also travel free at any time on the Tube, London Overground, and DLR when they are travelling with an adult who has a valid ticket. Up to 4 children under 11 years old accompanied by a paying adult travel free on London Underground. Unaccompanied children between 5 years and 10 years must have a valid 510 zip Oyster photo card for free travel. On trains in the London area run by the National Railways, children between 5 years and 15 years need a child ticket. Unaccompanied children aged between 11 years to 15 years must get an 11 to 15 zip Oyster photo card to travel free on buses, trams, and at child rate on the Tube, DLR, and London Overground services using an Oyster card. Now there's a bunch of other discounted options, but not all of them are valid for the people watching this, but I'll anyway leave a link in the description below so you can check it out at your own pace. Now, coming to the apps that you need for transport in the UK, and there are quite a bit. For cabs, like I mentioned, you can use Uber and Bolt. To know about trains, you can use Google Maps, Citymapper, or Trainline. For buses, check UK Bus Checker. To compare prices, use Gopili. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it. It compares trains, coaches, flights across Europe and then sorts them out by price, duration, departure time for ease of choosing. If you need help with the Tube, download the Tube Map London Underground. If you want to ride a bike, download the Santander Cycles app. If you want to know how to travel in the most eco-friendly way, download Changer's CO2 Fit. Now let's talk about traveling to and from the airport. If you're flying into the UK soon and to any one of London's airports and you're not sure how you're going to get to wherever you need to go, the good news is that all of the airports have a train service from the airport all the way till central London. They also have the National Express buses. Now you might be tempted to just take the Heathrow Express, for instance, because, well, it's more convenient, but you should keep in mind that they're slightly more expensive. If you're taking the Heathrow Express from Heathrow to central London, it's going to cost you about $37. But if you take one of the underground options, it's just going to cost you about $5, so you may want to consider that. Now, if you don't want to take a bus or a train because you probably have too much luggage or you're too tired, there's also the option of taking the taxis that are outside the airport, the black taxis. And they usually take you wherever you go. They have a prepaid meter inside the taxi. But a word of caution, it's really important for you to understand how much it's going to cost you because it can get quite expensive. And if you're not sure how much it's going to cost you, a quick way to do that would be to just quickly check and see if you took a Uber or a Bolt all the way from the airport to wherever you needed to go. Just see approximately how much it's going to cost you. And the airport cab is going to be a little similar, probably a little more. So keep that in mind because it can get really, really expensive if you take cabs from the airport. But sometimes there's no option, but just be aware. Most of these cabs have a prepaid meter, like I just told you, and they have a card option, so you can pay by card in the cab. Now, speaking of where you're going to live, did you know that some of the areas in the UK aren't as safe as other areas? Well, some of the areas are, quite honestly, quite shocking. They're crime rates are really high and they can be really dirty. Now, considering you're moving to the UK, you might be a little unsure on where to live. What if you're going to live in one of those places, right? Well, the easy way to do this is to watch this to find out and make sure you don't stay in any of these places.